What is it makes you a Democrat?
So, it's probably, I have a real social justice orientation. It probably comes from my roots and my faith. My wife and I are active Catholics. And so we identify very much with the social justice mission of the church. And I think that has made me much more oriented to the Democratic Party. And I also am someone, even though I'm a capitalist, and I've spent most of my career in the private sector as an entrepreneur starting businesses, I believe strongly that there's a role for government to prepare our citizens for the world and to create a safety net for those that are inevitably left behind.
Now, when you say you're a capitalist, does that, do you get the feeling that the drift of your party is in a different direction or not?
Well, no, not necessarily. I actually think the Democratic Party is pretty aligned on most things. Just like any political party, though, it's big, and there are people who, align more with the democratic socialist part of our party. And while I share some of the goals that they're trying to achieve, like universal health care and making sure college is affordable and things like that, I happen to believe the private economy is an amazing innovation machine and has really been one of the things that have absolutely distinguished our country from other countries around the world. So I think it's somewhat of a false choice to have to choose between capitalism and supporting the private economy, but also having government have a role in helping people's lives.
A whole bunch of people thinking about running for president
Yes.
on your side. But you're the only one who's actually declared and
Yes.
done it.
Well, I think I'm the right person for the job and I have the right vision for the country, but not enough people know who I am. So that's why I had to declare early, right? To make sure I could get out there and introduce myself to the key voters in Iowa and New Hampshire.
How would you describe the shape of the field and your place in it?
I don't know, I don't really think about it in those terms, in part because I'm a bit of a different kind of Democrat. If you look at the things I've worked on in the Congress, they've been progressive, they've been big ideas that kind of, I think, will really change this country and make the future better. But I've consistently worked on finding common ground to get them done.
Was that a deliberate evocation of Bill Clinton when you said a different kind of Democrat? That's the phrase he used in 1991 when he was trying to redefine the Democratic Party as somewhat more moderate. Is that purposeful?
No, it's not purposeful. I didn't actually realize he had said that. But people try to often label me, and because I worked with the other side, I was ranked the third most bipartisan member of Congress, and because of my business background, they assume I'm a moderate and centrist, and I am to some extent because I think the power in this country is really in the center.
Do you want to be known as a pro-business Democrat?
Well, listen, I'm a pro-jobs Democrat, and if you want to be pro-jobs, you to some extent have to be pro-business, because business creates all the jobs in this country, right? So I think about kind of this notion of capitalism and trying to make it more just and inclusive over time.
Do you think the current level of regulation of Wall Street and American business is adequate?
I think in some ways it is, and some ways it isn't. It's hard. I don't think we've done enough. We talked about climate. I think our efforts to put protections on our natural world in a classic sense have been good and appropriate. But have we done enough to deal with what's happening with carbon and what that's going to lead to climate change? Absolutely not. Do I think we've done things to strengthen the financial system and make it so that we can withstand another significant downturn in the economy? Absolutely. The banks are much stronger than they were.
What do you make of the big gyrations we've seen in financial markets over the last several weeks, a couple months actually?
I don't read too much into it. The markets go up and down because of how people think about the future, but also how they think about how things are priced. So I look more at what's happening to people, what's happening to our citizens. I mean, last year the Federal Reserve said that half of our country, if presented with a $500 surprise expense, meaning they wake up, something happens to their car, their house, or their health care, and they need $500, they don't have the savings or they don't have the capacity on their credit card. That's half the country. That, to me, is a much more worrisome statistic than what's happening with the stock market.
Then after 2020, when you hope to be president, what are the 2 or 3 most urgent things for Democrats to do?
I think we should build infrastructure. I think we should raise the earned income tax credit to put more money in people's pockets. I think we should fix our broken immigration and criminal justice reform system.
Now, how do we pay for the first two things that you just mentioned?
So I had a proposal to build $1 trillion of infrastructure, fully paid for. 40 Democrats, 40 Republicans, head of Freedom Caucus, head of Progressive Caucus, and I paid for it by tying it to international tax reform, which they did in the last tax bill, but they didn't pair it to infrastructure. How much better would that tax reform bill if within it?
Okay, that's water under the bridge.
But you can re-reform it and pay for infrastructure, right? So instead of cutting the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21, if you were to cut it from 35 to 25, which is what the business community asked for,
right,
you could have had $1 trillion infrastructure program.
So you'd like to take that corporate tax rate up a few points?
As part of launching $1 trillion infrastructure program? Absolutely. You know, I'd like more earned income tax credit, and I would probably pay for that. What I'd like to do is reform the capital gain system, right? I think capital gains rates and ordinary income rates should be the same unless you own the asset for a very long time.
Right.
So I'd like to create incentives for people to own assets for 7 or 10 years, because that means they'll invest in startups, they'll invest in infrastructure, the kind of stuff we need that has a much longer payback.
What should the top personal rate be?
I think the top personal rate where it was before this last tax bill was fine.
39.6?
Yeah, that was fine.
Where does strengthening the ability of workers to organize and what workers can do once they are organized, where does that fit into your agenda?
I'm pro-union, right? I think unions are the only people who wake up every day and actually fight for workers. And they just don't fight for the workers in the unions, they fight for all workers. So I want to create a dynamic where it's a level playing field and unions have the right to organize. But I also realize a lot of the economy is not unionized right now, and that's fine. Neither are my companies.
Should it be?
No, I don't think things should or shouldn't be. I think people should have the right to organize, and if it makes sense for them and the company, they should do it. But neither of my businesses were unionized.
You've been at this a year and a half.
Yes.
You got a very nice column from George Will about your candidacy, but you're at 1%. What conclusions do you draw right now about the viability of this enterprise, since you know that people are going to watch this and say, come on, he doesn't have a chance?
We think we have a great chance. I mean, so I've been to all 99 counties. We've got 25 people on the ground in Iowa. I've got 6 offices open. I've got about 40 people on the team. We're going to run a major campaign in 2019. I'm going to be all over Iowa, New Hampshire.
You're self-financing it, yes?
I have the ability to finance my campaign through Iowa, New Hampshire.
And is the only measure from your standpoint of the success of what you're doing now is if you become president?
So when my wife and I decided to do this, which is a leap of faith by definition.
Absolutely.
Right? Where you have to say, are we doing it for the right reason? Right? That's the first question we have to ask ourselves. And we answered that yes. Do we think we have something to say? Do we see a path to viability? And the answers to all of those questions were yes. And as long as I stay true to what I believe, which is this message of unity, common purpose, and actually looking at the facts, being honest with the American people about our problems, being honest about the solutions, and bringing people together to get those things done, as long as I stay true to that, there's no way this could be a bad experience.